Canada's oil deal just reshaped the global energy map forever. They ditched the US for China, and now America's empire is paying the price while Canada builds its own. Picture North America as a living organism, its arteries pulsing with black gold from Canada's oil sands to the beating heart of the US economy. For over half a century, this flow fueled an empire, with Canada as the silent donor and America the insatiable overlord, dictating terms and reaping profits. Then, on April 2, 2025, those arteries rerouted. A $34 billion Canadian pipeline, pumping 890,000 barrels of oil daily, turned east to China, slicing through a 60-year alliance like a surgeon's blade. This wasn't just a pipeline, it was a guillotine, severing America's stranglehold on global energy. Canada, rich in crude, had long been America's obedient supplier, its oil flowing south at a $15 per barrel discount, refined in Texas, priced in Houston, and controlled by Washington. This was economic vassalage, not partnership. The Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion, TMX, completed in May 2024, shattered that dynamic, tripling Canada's export capacity and opening the Pacific to new buyers. When President Trump imposed a 10% tariff on Canadian oil in early 2025, Canada didn't bow. It pivoted. China, welding contracts sharper than swords, stepped into the void, leaving the US staring at drying pipelines and a fractured alliance. This is a saga of leverage, betrayal, and a global chessboard where energy is the queen and pipelines redraw borders. When the oil stopped flowing south, the empire began to tremble. The tariff wasn't just a policy, it was a spark that ignited a geopolitical firestorm, exposing America's vulnerabilities and Canada's newfound strength. This is about who controls the world when energy becomes a weapon. Let's dive into this reckoning, where silent deals roar louder than missiles, and the balance of power shifts with every barrel redirected. We'll explore how a single pipeline reshaped alliances, how a tariff backfired spectacularly, and how China quietly checkmated the West, all while Canada emerged as an energy titan. Canada's new pipeline just rewrote the global energy map. It's sending oil to China, not the US, and it's costing America billions while Canada cashes in. Imagine Canada as a caged titan, its oil sands brimming with wealth but shackled by geography, forced to bow to a single master. For decades, 98% of its crude flowed south to the US, discounted by $15 per barrel, refined in Gulf Coast plants, and sold at America's whim. This wasn't trade, it was economic servitude. The US didn't just buy oil, it dictated terms, prices, and power, treating Canada like a colony in its own backyard. Every barrel was a chain, priced in Houston, refined in Texas, and discounted for being Canadian. This was economic colonization, plain and simple. Then came the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion, TMX, a $34 billion, 1,147-kilometer lifeline from Alberta's oil sands to Burnaby, British Columbia. Completed in May 2024, after a decade of lawsuits, protests, and cost overruns, TMX was a revolution forged in steel. It tripled Canada's export capacity from 300,000 to 890,000 barrels per day, unlocking the Pacific coast for global markets. Tankers now prowl off Burnaby like sharks, ready to ferry oil to Asia. Canada gained options, and options are power. No longer chained to US refineries, Canada could choose its buyers, its prices, its destiny. TMX wasn't infrastructure, it was emancipation. The numbers are seismic. TMX generates $20 billion in annual revenue, tapping into Asia's $15 trillion energy market. Canadian oil, once sold at a loss to keep pipelines flowing, now commands a $15 per barrel premium overseas. This isn't a trickle, it's a tsunami, flooding markets in China, Japan, and India with crude that once belonged to America. Every barrel shipped to Asia is one less for the US, and replacing it isn't like swapping batteries. US Gulf Coast refineries, built specifically for Canada's heavy, sour crude, can't pivot to lighter Saudi or Nigerian oil without costly, time-consuming retooling. Goldman Sachs projects $5 to $10 per barrel price hikes if Canada diverts supply, translating to 80 cents more per gallon at US pumps. In an election year, that's a political landmine. threatening voter wallets and campaign promises. But TMX is more than economics. It's a declaration of sovereignty. Canada is done begging. For decades, it waited for U.S. pipeline approvals, fair prices, and a shred of respect. TMX is Canada building its own throne, inviting new players to the table: China, Japan, India, while the U.S. watches its influence erode. When a supplier gains leverage, the buyer becomes a supplicant. The U.S. assumed Canada's loyalty was eternal, but loyalty fades when cages are unlocked. TMX is Canada's middle finger to economic subjugation, and the world is taking notice. Trump's tariff just sparked a trade war with Canada. It pushed Canada straight into China's arms. Now, America's paying the price at the pump and beyond. Enter President Trump, storming into 2025 with a gambler's bravado and a bully's playbook. His 10% tariff on Canadian oil and gas, framed as a national security move, was an ultimatum: kneel or bleed. It was a match tossed into a powder keg. Trump expected Canada to grovel, to beg for exemptions, to remain the loyal supplier it had always been. But this wasn't the Canada of old. TMX gave Canada an escape hatch, and it leapt through it with defiance, rewriting the rules of a decades-long partnership. The tariff was a miscalculation of historic proportions. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers estimates it could cost Canadian producers $10 billion annually. But the U.S. stands to lose far more. U.S. refineries depend on 3.9 million barrels of Canadian crude daily, over 60% of America's imported oil. If Canada diverts just 20% to Asia, Goldman Sachs warns of 80-cent per gallon gas price spikes, with Wood Mackenzie projecting $5 to $10 per barrel surges. These aren't abstract figures. They'll sting at pumps, inflate grocery bills, spike utility costs, and fuel voter rage in an election year. The tariff didn't just hurt Canada, it exposed America's fragility. Canada's counterstrike was surgical and ruthless. In June 2024, Ottawa launched a $6.5 billion global markets accelerator, a war chest to conquer Asian and European energy markets. $5 billion fueled oil and gas expansion, while $1 billion shielded farmers from U.S. trade retaliation. This wasn't defense, it was economic warfare cloaked in diplomacy. Canada sent a resounding message: we're not America's lapdog anymore. The world heard it loud and clear, from Beijing to Brussels. The tariff also laid bare America's vulnerabilities. Canada supplies 42 terawatt-hours of electricity to the U.S. annually, powering 4 million homes. In January 2025, Ontario floated a 25% surcharge on electricity exports, triggering brownout warnings in New York and Michigan. This wasn't a trade skirmish, it was a sovereignty flex. Canada holds more than oil, gas, LNG, electricity, and every molecule can be a weapon. Trump's tariff didn't tame Canada, it unleashed a titan. The fallout is a lesson in hubris. The U.S. assumed Canada had no options, but TMX rewrote the playbook. Canada didn't burn bridges, it built highways to Beijing, Tokyo, Mumbai. When an ally gains choices, the old master becomes a beggar. Trump's tariff wasn't just a policy, it was the spark that ignited Canada's rebellion, redrawing the energy map and exposing America's overconfidence. The empire thought it could bully its neighbor, but the neighbor learned to fight back, and the consequences are rippling through global markets, from gas stations to grocery stores. China just outsmarted the U.S. in the energy game. They didn't fire a shot, just signed a contract. Now they're controlling Canada's oil and America's future. While Washington and Ottawa traded blows, China played a stealthier game, moving pieces on a global chessboard with surgical precision. Rongsheng Chemical, one of China's largest private refiners, didn't arrive with armies or fanfare. They came with contracts, as sharp and lethal as any weapon. In Calgary, a sleek glass tower became their fortress, a symbol of China's ambitions in the heart of Canada's oil country. A deal with Suncor Energy locked in 200,000 barrels per month starting June 2025, shipped via very large crude carriers, VLCCs, from Canada's Pacific coast to Chinese ports. This wasn't a trade deal, it was a geopolitical earthquake, the first fracture in the US-Canada oil symbiosis. China's appetite for Canada's heavy, sour crude, 800,000 barrels daily, aligned perfectly with TMX's output. But this was about far more than oil. China saw leverage, a supply chain insulated from the volatile Strait of Hormuz, a shield against U.S. sanctions, a geopolitical trump card in a fracturing world. Rongsheng's Calgary office didn't stop at Suncor. Multi-year FOB contracts with Cenovus Energy, Canadian Natural Resources, BP, and Shell secured Canada's oil sands for Asia. Once oil hits the dock, China owns its destiny, whether it flows to Beijing, Tokyo, or Mumbai for a $3 per barrel arbitrage profit. China's imports of Canadian crude surged 22% in 2024 to 184,000 barrels per day, and that's merely the opening gambit. This isn't about fueling factories, it's about buying reliability, a counterweight to Middle Eastern chaos and U.S. pressure. The U.S. doesn't own energy anymore, it leases it, brokers it, manipulates it, but control is slipping through its fingers like sand. While Trump tweeted tariffs and threats, China bought silence with contracts, and Canada listened, eager to break free from American dominance. This is chess, not checkers, and China is playing for keeps. Every barrel Canada sends east weakens America's grip. U.S. refineries, built specifically for Canada's heavy crude, can't switch to Saudi or Venezuelan oil overnight without costly retooling and supply chain disruptions. If Canada diverts 20% of its 3.9 million daily barrels, America's refining system stalls, triggering chaos. Gas prices could spike, supply chains could choke, and elections could hinge on the fallout. China's not just buying oil, it's buying influence, and Canada's selling more than crude. Rongsheng's Calgary Tower is a spearhead, signaling that Asia, not America, is the future of energy markets. The deeper truth is chilling. China's contracts are a hedge against a fracturing world, where energy is a weapon and reliability is power. Canada's pivot to Asia isn't trade, it's a realignment of global alliances. The US thought Canada was its backyard, a loyal supplier forever tethered to its refineries. But backyards get fenced off when new neighbors offer better deals. China's checkmate is silent, but it's deafening, reshaping the global order one barrel at a time, leaving America scrambling to reclaim its fading dominance. Canada's building an energy empire right under America's nose. It's not just oil. They're weaponizing electricity and gas too. And the US might be left in the dark, literally. TMX was the spark, but Canada's ambitions are global, and its rise is rewriting the energy map. LNG Canada, a $40 billion mega project in Kitimat, British Columbia, will ship 14 million tons of liquefied natural gas annually to China, Japan, and South Korea starting December 2025. With Asia's gas demand growing 8% annually, Canada's timing is razor-sharp, positioning it as a key player in the world's fastest-growing energy markets. Meanwhile, Arctic LNG routes are in development to supply Europe, filling a vacuum left by Russia's declining influence. Canada exported 42 terawatt-hours of electricity to the US in 2024, powering 4 million homes, but Ontario and Quebec now threaten to slash exports in retaliation for US tariffs. This isn't a supplier, it's a superpower awakening from a long slumber. The numbers are jaw-dropping. By 2035, the American Board and Industry Consensus Projects Canada could rake in $500 billion annually from oil, gas, and hydro exports. Every barrel, every volt, erodes U.S. leverage. Canada's not just bypassing America, it's building an energy empire that spans continents. China's contracts are a hedge, but Canada's options are a revolution. The U.S. assumed Canada's loyalty was unbreakable, but loyalty fades when a partner discovers new horizons. U.S. refineries are vulnerable. Built for Canada's heavy, sour crude, they face chaos if supply tightens. Alternatives, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Nigeria, are costlier, less reliable, and entangled in foreign policy quagmires. If Canada reroutes 20% of its 3.9 million daily barrels, America's refining system seizes up. Goldman Sachs predicts 80-cent per gallon gas price spikes, with Wood Mackenzie warning of $5 to $10 per barrel surges. These aren't hypotheticals. They'll hit American wallets, disrupt supply chains, and sway elections. Canada's not burning bridges. It's building highways to Asia and Europe, leaving the US to navigate a new reality where it's no longer the sole destination. Canada's pivot is a masterclass in pragmatism and foresight. The $6.5 billion Global Markets Accelerator, launched in June 2024, funds oil, gas, and trade expansion, ensuring Canada's foothold in global markets. Arctic LNG routes and hydro exports signal a Canada that's done playing second fiddle. When a partner has options, you become the backup plan. The US is no longer the center of Canada's energy universe. It's just one of many customers, and a demanding one at that. Canada's rise is a wake-up call, reminding the world that even the closest allies can redefine their roles when pushed too far. Trump's auto tariffs just declared war on Canada's economy. He's trying to erase Canada's auto industry overnight. But Prime Minister Carney is turning the tables with a fierce retaliation. On April 23, 2025, Trump escalated his trade aggression, announcing a 25% tariff on Canadian cars, effective April 3rd, with a chilling warning that it could go up. From the Oval Office, he proclaimed, "We don't want your cars. We want to make our own," targeting Canada's auto sector, its second-largest export after oil, valued at $51 billion in 2023, with 93% shipped to the US. This was a calculated strike, threatening 125,000 direct Canadian auto jobs and 500,000 related jobs across Ontario's manufacturing heartland, from Windsor's assembly lines to parts suppliers in Mississauga. The tariffs disrupt the deeply integrated North American auto industry, where parts cross borders multiple times before a vehicle is complete. U.S. consumers will pay the price, with J.P. Morgan estimating new car prices rising by $4,000 to $5,300. A Chevy pickup built in Oshawa could jump from $60,000 to $75,000, hitting American buyers and parts makers reliant on Canadian supply chains. Stellantis halted production at its Windsor plant for 2 weeks, starting April 7th, idling 3,600 workers, with ripple effects crippling suppliers and dealerships. Trump's tariffs risk tens of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border, undermining North America's ability to compete with global auto giants like China and Germany. Prime Minister Mark Carney, speaking in Port Moody, British Columbia, on April 24, 2025, delivered a resolute rebuke. He said he doesn't want Canada to play any part in the North American auto industry. "So, I will be equally clear. This is Canada. We decide what happens here," Carney declared, ahead of the April 28 general election. Carney vowed to safeguard Canada's auto sector, promising retaliatory tariffs designed for maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact in Canada. Canada's defiance is a sovereignty flex, refusing to let Trump dictate its industrial future. Carney's response builds on Canada's oil pivot strategy. On April 3rd, Canada imposed a 25% tariff on non-CUSMA-compliant U.S. vehicles, projected to raise $5.7 billion to support affected workers and businesses. Unlike Trump's blunt approach, Canada exempted auto parts to preserve supply chain integration, a calculated move to minimize domestic harm while maximizing pressure on the U.S. Carney's countermeasures protect 125,000 auto jobs, countering Trump's attempt to break Canada. The auto tariffs could ignite a broader trade war, with Canada leveraging its economic clout to push back, just as it did with oil exports to Asia. This isn't just about cars, it's about Canada asserting its right to shape its economic destiny in the face of American aggression. Canada's fighting back against Trump's economic onslaught. They're hitting the U.S. where it hurts, without wrecking their own economy. And they're building a new industrial empire while America scrambles. Trump's 25% auto tariffs are more than a trade policy. They're an economic siege designed to choke Canada's auto industry, which employs 125,000 directly and supports 500,000 related jobs. The $51 billion auto export sector, with 93% bound for the U.S., faces existential risk. As Trump's April 23, 2025, declaration aims to redirect manufacturing to American soil, but the integrated North American auto ecosystem, built on decades of cross-border collaboration, doesn't bend so easily. Trump's tariffs will backfire, raising U.S. car prices by $4,000 to $5,300 per J.P. Morgan and disrupting supply chains. American consumers and workers will suffer as plants like Stellantis's Windsor facility, which idled 3,600 workers for 2 weeks, signal broader chaos. Trump's siege threatens North America's global auto dominance, handing an advantage to rivals like China. Mark Carney's leadership has galvanized Canada's response, transforming Trump's attack into an opportunity for economic reinvention. On April 24, 2025, Carney reiterated, "This is Canada. We decide what happens here," signaling a unified front against U.S. bullying. Canada's $2 billion Strategic Response Fund, announced March 26, 2025, is fortifying the auto industry, investing in competitiveness and a domestic supply chain to reduce U.S. reliance. Canada's counter-tariffs on U.S. vehicles, raising $5.7 billion, target non-CUSMA compliant cars while sparing auto parts, a surgical strike to pressure the U.S. without destabilizing Canada's economy. Carney's strategy shields 125,000 auto jobs, supporting workers and businesses hit by shutdowns like Stellantis and countering Trump's economic warfare. This auto battle mirrors Canada's oil pivot. Just as TMX redirected 890,000 barrels daily to Asia, Canada's auto sector is diversifying markets and strengthening resilience. Canada's not just defending, it's redefining its role, leveraging its $6.5 billion global markets accelerator to forge new trade ties with Europe and Asia. Carney's vision extends beyond survival, aiming to make Canada a hub for electric vehicles and advanced manufacturing. The $5.7 billion from counter-tariffs funds retraining and innovation, ensuring Canada's auto industry thrives despite Trump's assault. Canada's unified front is a masterclass in pragmatism, turning Trump's siege into a catalyst for economic sovereignty. The U.S. is vulnerable. Auto tariffs could cost tens of thousands of American jobs, while oil diversions threaten 80-cent per gallon gas price spikes. Canada's energy and auto empire is rising, with LNG, hydro, and now industrial diversification challenging U.S. dominance. This isn't just a trade war, it's a reckoning, where Canada's defiance reshapes North America's economic future, proving even the closest allies can stand tall when pushed too far. The world's energy order just changed forever. Canada pulled it off without firing a shot, and America's still waiting to realize it's no longer in charge. This isn't a revolution with tanks, sirens, or breaking news tickers. On April 2, 2025, history shifted through 1,147 kilometers of pipe. Canada didn't storm Washington. It shipped to Tokyo, Seoul, Jiangsu, quietly rewriting the rules of global power. When an ally learns to live without you, they don't ask permission. The U.S. waits for oil, waits for price stability, waits to see if its empire still gets a discount. Power doesn't shift with elections, it shifts with pipelines, and Canada now holds the keys. Canada's pivot isn't hostility, it's survival, forged in pragmatism and necessity. Done waiting for pipeline approvals, fair prices, or respect, Canada built its own empire, brick by brick, barrel by barrel. TMX, LNG Canada, Arctic routes, and hydro exports are moves in a game America didn't anticipate. China's contracts whisper a new order, where energy flows dictate power, and the U.S. is no longer the conductor of the global orchestra. You're not just watching history, you're ahead of it. The world didn't shift in headlines, it shifted when oil changed direction. Next time you see pipes in the dirt, workers in orange vests, or tankers on the horizon, remember 890,000 barrels, $20 billion, a tariff blunder, and a silent checkmate. This script isn't for the masses. It's for the few who see the cracks before the collapse, who feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The energy map is redrawn, and Canada holds the pen. Stay sharp, because the next move is already in motion, and the world is watching to see who claims the throne.